The first thing you need to understand about cults is that they are not what you think they are. I know that's exactly what someone who'd been in a cult would say. I know it sounds like the beginning of a recruitment pitch. Bear with me. When most people hear the word cult, they picture something visually dramatic. Robes, compounds, charismatic men with beards and biblical cadences who collect wives and weapons in equal measure. The word conjures Jonestown, Waco, Heaven's Gate, extreme and cinematic, and crucially recognizable, the kind of thing you'd see coming. The group my brother joined didn't look like any of that. They met in a renovated warehouse space in Portland, Oregon that had exposed brick and good lighting and a locally sourced coffee station in the lobby. Their leader, a man who went by the name Elias or Patagonia and gave talks that sounded like a hybrid of a TED Talk and a therapy session. Their literature was self-published but well-designed. Their social media was tasteful. Their members were, by visible measure, educated, thoughtful, and kind. That is exactly what made it dangerous. My brother's name is Daniel. He is 4 years younger than me. I'm 38 now, so he was 26 when he first got involved. He had gone through a hard period, a breakup that hit him badly, a job loss, the death of our father, all within about 18 months. The particular kind of accumulated grief that leaves a person with their defenses down and their need for meaning very high. He found Elias's group through a friend of a friend, went to one Saturday session out of curiosity, and was inside the architecture of it before he understood what the architecture was. By the time I realized what was happening to him, he had been involved for 8 months and had stopped being someone I fully recognized. The changes in Daniel were gradual, which is how these things work. If someone handed you a frog and told you it would slowly become unrecognizable over the course of a year, you'd watch carefully. But the changes came the way erosion comes, imperceptible in any given moment, dramatic in retrospect. He stopped calling as often. When he did call, he used language that felt slightly off, just a degree or two removed from how he normally talked, phrases that were clearly borrowed, a new habit of reframing any concern you raised as a reflection of your own unexamined biases. He became in conversation slippery, not hostile, slippery. Every handhold you reached for turned out to be air. He moved into a community house with 8 other members. He quit his job to work for the organization's in-house design studio, which paid a nominal amount that kept him technically independent while keeping him financially dependent on the group's ecosystem. He started referring to Elias by first name with a specific reverence that I recognized but couldn't immediately name, and then I named it. It was the reverence you extend to someone who has replaced your own judgment with theirs. Our mother noticed before I did, or at least she said something first. She called me in tears in January, almost a year after he'd gotten involved, saying that Daniel had told her at Christmas that her grief over Dad was, quote, unprocessed attachment to an identity that no longer served her, that our father's death was an opportunity she was resisting. He had said this to our mother about her dead husband. That was when I understood it had gone somewhere I couldn't reach from the outside. I want to be honest about the decision-making process that led to what I did, because in retrospect it looks more deliberate than it felt at the time. I didn't sit down and plan an extraction strategy. I didn't watch documentaries and read books and consult experts and arrive at infiltration as a logical conclusion. What actually happened is messier and more human than that. What happened is that I drove to Portland, knocked on the door of the community house, and asked if I could come to a Saturday session. That's it. That's the whole plan. I drove there and knocked. I had told myself it was just to see, to understand what I was dealing with, to look Elias in the eye and get a read on him, the way you want to see the thing your brother has handed his trust to and make your own assessment. I wasn't thinking in terms of months or years. I was thinking in terms of one Saturday. One Saturday became 3 years. Getting in was easier than it should have been, though I understand now why it was easy. Groups like this are not trying to keep people out. They are trying to draw people in. Their permeability is a feature. The coffee station, the good lighting, the carefully calibrated warmth, it's all engineered to lower your threshold for entry, to make you feel that the barrier is lower than it is. What they don't tell you is that the barrier only works in one direction. I went to the Saturday session. I sat in a room with about 40 people on low cushioned benches arranged in a loose circle. Elias spoke for about an hour. He was, and I say this with full awareness of what he was, extraordinarily compelling, not in a showy way, in the most dangerous way. He sounded reasonable. He talked about ego dissolution and community accountability, and what he called the noise of the conditioned self, in language that was accessible and non-threatening, and threaded through with just enough genuine insight that you kept nodding before you noticed what you were nodding to. I saw Daniel across the circle. He didn't see me immediately. When he did, his face did something complicated, a flash of genuine pleasure at seeing me, immediately overlaid with something else: wariness, the specific wariness of someone who has been taught to interpret outside relationships as threats. After the session, Elias came to speak with me personally. They always do this with new attendees. He shook my hand and held it slightly too long, the way people do when they want you to feel specifically chosen, and asked what had brought me in. I said I was going through a hard period and was looking for community. Both things were true, which made them easy to say. He said, "You're exactly where you need to be." I smiled and said thank you, and felt the small cold clarity of knowing exactly what I was dealing with. I will not give you the organization's name or Elias's real name, for reasons I'll explain at the end. What I will tell you is how it worked, because the mechanics of it are important and not unique to this group. The first stage is love bombing, overwhelming warmth and inclusion. Every person in the group made you feel simultaneously special and belonging, two needs that usually compete and rarely get met simultaneously, which is why meeting them both at once is so disarming. You are seen, you are welcomed, you are, implicitly, better for being here than you were before you arrived. The second stage is gradual boundary installation. Your relationships outside the group are gently, consistently reframed as sources of conditioned thinking. Not forbidden, never forbidden outright, but subtly pathologized. Your family's concern becomes their ego. Your old friend's skepticism becomes their fear of growth. You are not cut off from the outside world. You are given a new lens through which the outside world looks like the problem. The third stage is what Elias called accountability integration, which was the most insidious thing I witnessed and the hardest to explain to people who haven't seen it. Members were encouraged to share in group settings their conditioned patterns, essentially their vulnerabilities, their histories, their wounds. This was framed as healing. What it actually was a systematic transfer of personal information to the group, and to Elias, that could be used subtly to maintain control. Not overtly, not cruelly, just a consistent, careful pressure applied to the exact places where each person was weakest. I watched Elias do this with 40 people over 3 years. I watched him hold a room of genuinely good, genuinely searching people and apply that pressure so skillfully that they thanked him for it. I maintained my cover by being useful. I have a background in communications and I'm competent with design software, and within 2 months of arriving, I'd offered to help with the group's newsletter and social media presence. This was accepted enthusiastically. It gave me a functional reason to be deeply embedded without triggering the wariness that attached to members who seemed to be there only for emotional content. It also gave me access to more than I would otherwise have seen. I won't detail everything I saw. Some of it is part of an ongoing process I'll mention at the end. Some of it I'm not ready to put into a public account. What I'll say is that what functions smoothly and warmly at the public level of a group like this does not function the same way in its interior. The accountability that was preached was not practiced by Elias. The community resources that members contributed to, money, time, labor, were not distributed the way members understood them to be. And the exit process for anyone who tried to leave involved a kind of social and psychological pressure that bore no resemblance to the gentle language used to describe it. I watched a woman named Karen try to leave in my second year. She had been a member for 4 years and had during that time referred her sister, her closest friend, and her adult daughter to the group. When she expressed doubt, the group turned. Not viciously, never viciously, that's not how it works, but turned all the same. Her doubts were her conditioning talking. Her desire to leave was resistance to growth. Her support system inside the group became overnight a gentle and relentless pressure system. She stayed. I think about Karen a lot. Getting Daniel out took longer than getting myself in, and it remains the most painstaking thing I have ever done. The research on cult exit, and I did eventually read everything I could find, in my apartment late at night after sessions, the part of my life that existed in a separate reality from my days inside, is consistent on one point. Confrontation doesn't work. Argument doesn't work. Evidence doesn't work. The more you push, the more the person retreats into the group's framework, which has already given them a ready-made interpretation of your pushing. You are afraid of their growth. You are attached to the old version of them. You don't understand what they found. What works, what the research says, what the cult exit counselors I eventually found said, is connection. Patient, non-confrontational, long-term connection. You keep the relationship alive. You keep showing up. You make yourself the evidence that the outside world has not abandoned them and is not a threat. And you wait for a crack, a moment of doubt, a disillusionment, a thing that doesn't add up the way the framework says it should. And when the crack appears, you are there. My crack appeared in Daniel in the spring of my 3rd year. A member named Paul, who had been one of Daniel's closest friends inside the group, left abruptly. Not gradually, abruptly, overnight, in a way that suggested something specific had happened rather than a gradual accumulation of doubts. The group's handling of Paul's departure was different from Karen's. There was a harder edge to it. Paul's name became something careful and avoided, and the speed with which 40 people collectively rewrote their relationship to someone they'd called a brother was something I watched Daniel watch. I didn't say anything. I waited. 3 weeks later, Daniel called me at 11 at night. He said he'd been having trouble sleeping. He said he had a question he needed to ask someone outside, and he didn't know who else to call. I said, "Ask me anything." He said, "Does it ever worry you, what you've seen here?" I said, "Yes, for a long time." He said, "Tell me." We talked until 4 in the morning. I will compress the next 6 months because they belong more to Daniel than to me. Leaving is not a moment. It is a process, and it is a painful one, because leaving means accepting that the thing you gave years of genuine trust to was not what it presented itself as, that the people who felt like family used your vulnerabilities as leverage, that the growth you believed you were doing was happening inside a container someone else controlled. That grief. Daniel needed a therapist who specialized in cult recovery. He needed time. He needed more 4 in the morning phone calls than I can count. He needed occasionally to be angry at me for coming the way I did instead of just asking him to leave, a conversation we've had several times, and which I understand and which I don't have a clean answer to. What I'll say is this. If I had knocked on his door at month 8 and said, "Daniel, I think this is a cult and you need to leave," he would not have left. The Daniel who was inside the architecture at month 8 did not have access to the doubt that could hear that sentence. I needed to be present for the crack. I couldn't manufacture the crack. I could only be there when it came. He's been out for 2 years now. He's in Portland still, which surprised me, but he said leaving the city would feel like letting them take that too. He's in therapy. He's rebuilt some friendships. He's cautious in ways he wasn't before. About community, about charismatic people, about his own needs and what they make him susceptible to. I think that caution is appropriate, and I think he came by it honestly. He called me on my birthday last month. We talked for 2 hours about nothing in particular. He laughed 3 times in the way he laughed before. The full one, the one I hadn't heard for 3 years and had been scared I might not hear again. I keep that. I keep it carefully. I am not the same person who drove to Portland on an impulse with no plan. 3 years of maintaining a constructed version of yourself in an environment designed to dismantle constructed versions of yourself does something to the interior architecture. Dr. Lena Marsh, the therapist I started seeing after I left, she describes it as identity porousness. You go in knowing you are performing, but performance over time requires you to inhabit what you are performing, and what you inhabit changes you whether you consent to it or not. I absorbed things from those 3 years. Some of them are useful. I am more patient than I was, a better listener, more attuned to the ways people signal need without saying so. Some of them I am still sorting. I notice sometimes a pull toward the clarity of a closed system, the appeal of a framework that explains everything. I recognize that pull now, which is the important part. I don't follow it, but I notice it. What I lost, which I don't think I'll entirely recover, is a certain uncomplicated trust in my own perceptions. When you have spent 3 years carefully managing what you show a room, you develop a sensitivity to performance in others that doesn't fully turn off. I notice in normal social interactions things I would rather not notice. The slight adjustment people make when they want to be liked. The micromanagement of impression. None of it is sinister, it's human. But I see it now in a way I didn't before, and seeing it makes a certain ease in social situations harder to access. Dr. Marsh calls this a reasonable response to an unreasonable experience. I'm working on letting that be enough of an explanation. Elias's organization still operates. I want to be clear-eyed about that. There is an ongoing process involving myself, 2 former members, including Paul, and a journalist I've been working with for the past year, that I am not at liberty to detail, which is why I've kept names out of this account. Nothing has concluded. The coffee station is still on, the Saturday sessions still happen. There are people in that warehouse right now who believe they are growing. I think about them. I think especially about Karen. I don't know if she's still there. I hope she's found a crack. If you are reading this and you recognize something in what I've described, not this specific group, but the shape of it, the love bombing, the language drift, the reframing of outside concern as a threat, please talk to someone. There are resources. There are cult recovery specialists and exit counselors and communities of former members who know exactly what the particular grief of leaving feels like. You are not crazy for being in it. The architecture is designed by people who are very good at what they do. And if you have someone you love who is in something like this, I am not going to tell you to do what I did. 3 years is a long time, and the cost of it was real, and I can't in good conscience present it as a template. What I'll say is, keep the line open. Don't make their membership the only thing between you. Be the evidence that the outside hasn't given up on them, and be there when the crack comes. It comes. It came for Daniel. For a long time, that was the only thing I knew for certain.
Now I'm learning to build out from there, adding certainty slowly, the way you add weight to a recovering structure. Carefully, incrementally, testing each addition before you trust it. It's slow work, but I was always better at slow work than I gave myself credit for. For Daniel, and for everyone still waiting for the crack.